Hello and welcome to the Inquisitorial Archive. My name is Kevin O'Rourke and today I'm going to be talking about the third or fourth session, I'll check it up later, but I think it's the fourth session of my only war game. Yeah, it's the fourth one. The session began when the players embarking on their second mission. I'd already detailed out the basics to them. Spoilers, I was using the 11th hour adventure, which is one of the ones that Fantasy Flight published before the release of Only War. They published this to use it, and I had to modify it a bit, and I didn't stick with everything, and I changed certain elements of different things, but I think the players had fun. But it started with some of the players like, oh yeah, we'll go off and we'll get our equipment. One of the things, seeing as they were given 2 months of food, they were going to be going on trials, and they're given like they're given like inflatable boats, things like that. They're all this survival gear, except for despite the fact they're supposed to get them, they didn't get tents. They're supposed to get a tent for a 2-man tent between groups of 2 people kind of thing, but didn't quite work out like that because the mean turned and sent, and they gave them as I described last time, they gave them different equipment. So to start the session there was a lot of thoughts about how they're going to manage this. Like, well, we we'll go to Administratum, like no, the Administratum, we want to stay a bit off their radar. We don't want to be attracting any more attention of the Department of Unitorn than we can. So one of the PCs said, oh wait, we'll go to Lieutenant Jimmy. He's one of the Brontean Long Knives, an officer of Brontean Long Knives, who he can get people things, and they'd already, so they said, okay, we'll go to him. So the sergeant said he'd go. Sergeant decided, I'll go to him. I won't involve anybody else in case I get caught. In case I get found out, it's on me. It's not on the rest of the group. So he goes off, and it's like, okay. He goes into Jimmy. He's like, hey Jimmy, I was wondering if you could assist me with something. He's like, of course, I will gladly assist you in any way I can, my friend. He's like, well, I need a few tents. I need to acquire some. He's like, well, how many do you need? I need 5 tents about. He's like, okay. Well, this could take a bit of effort. I mean, 1 tent isn't so bad, but 5, it's quite a big job. What are you willing to offer me? And I asked the player, who's like, hey, okay, so what are you offering? And like, what's your commerce? And he's like, oh, I actually don't have commerce. And it's like, because one of the players wasn't there, who's playing the medic. This guy was commerce, and he dealt with Jimmy in the past. And so it's like, well, if you don't have commerce, I'll let you do it, but you've got to offer him something good. He's like, oh, I could give you rations, which is what the other player kept trying to barter away, and he doing the rolls like he was giving, because they've got really nice rations compared to everyone else. So he's like, okay, well, it's like, okay, it's like, well, what do you want? It's like, well, he's like, well, I could, some of your unit seems finely equipped with grenades. And he's like, okay, what kind of grenades do you need? It's like, oh yeah, frag, crack. I know a guy who needs some plasma, but I don't think you have any of those. It's like, okay, I don't actually have any of those. Like, well, how many do you need? He's like, 10. And they're like, well, that's actually going to clear us out a lot of the way for most of our stuff. So like, okay, that's 2 grenades a tent. And I'm like, okay, it's easier to cover up the loss of grenades. You just say you used them. For when you're getting them refilled back in, which we'll be dealing with next time. That might cause a bit of a problem, but especially because the comms are with on this mission, I don't think they use 1 or 2 crack grenades. The commissar would mind seeing they actually had tents, but the commissar was kept out of the loop on this one. But when we went back to the group, it was like, he had 4 grenades himself. It was like, yeah, he can't cover 10. So he had to talk to 2 weapon specialist guys, and they were like, okay, well, we'll hand over some of our grenades, because you get 4 additional grenades if you're a weapon specialist, or frag or crack. So like, okay, pretty cool. And that worked out pretty well. So they managed to acquire this, although before they had managed to wrangle this up, they had started thinking, hey, what if one of the NPCs suggested, like, well, Sergeant, what about them the guys in the Penal Legion? They don't, they're probably being equipped with them, but they're far less deserving of them than we are. And then the sergeant to the rest is like, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Maybe, they're, as far as the player characters are concerned, these guys are only, and they've said themselves, these guys are only good for clearing out minefields. Like, and these guys are cannon fodder. They don't. Who cares? Who gives a shit if they're really, sick and stuff after they've because they don't have tents. It's like, well, they're gonna die soon enough anyway. We're important. We're far more important to war effort. So they were honestly thinking about either A, sneaking in and stealing the tents from these guys, some of the Penal Legion guys sneaking across the fence, which would be dangerous enough itself, or B, which I think was far worse, was great that the players are actually considering this, but the NPC going, well, because they literally do, the Bronte Line Knife guys, they're like, okay, they're lowborns, dude, that was like, the Penal Legion guys, they're like, literally, these guys are cannon fodder, they're scum of the highest order, or the lowest order. Is like, just the reactions of some of the players, like, oh yeah, well, like, they started talking about, we could ambush some of them once they get into the jungle, kill them, take the tent. And these are highborn guys, but they look, it's not even registering with them, these guys are human, because they're so low down. It's like, yeah, we need these tents, and so it's like, it's great. And someday I'll run a game from the other's perspective where you're like, you're a Penal Legion, you don't care because you're going to die, you've got a one-way ticket. It's like, okay, that was pretty cool though, just getting the discussion of, and the fact that this noble unit was talking about killing a bunch of Penal Legionnaires to get their tents. And that all coming up because in the system you don't necessarily get all the gear you're supposed to. And trying to complain to the Department of Munitorum guys is going to end up badly. You might just end up getting flogged and you don't get anything because you're saying they're wrong. And they can't be wrong because there's a big thing they talk about in some of the books. Because they're servants of the god emperor kind of thing. Plus, as I kind of point out, well, it might not say the mistake was made on their end. You could have put in the wrong numeral or something in a digit, and that could be different between your tent unit, between tents, and applesauce. So that's the way it works out. So I was like, okay, grand. The players set out on their mission. Ancient Kasugi wasn't with them this session, or was Medic Blackthrone, and they went out. They were I described like, oh, you got 2 months worth of supplies. And I said, okay, after the first 2 weeks, Medic Blackthrone is actually going to turn out to sergeant. He'd already said like he'd acquired some demolitions. He'd just traded off a load of food, and he turned around a little bit into the journey. He's like, he goes to sergeant. I've got to start getting into the supplies we were given by the commissar last time for food because I've used my food. He's like, what happened to your food? And he's like, no sir, I have. And he shows him like the rucksack. He's like, I have plenty of food, I just don't want to eat it. And he's like showing him the demolition. He's like, oh okay, yeah, go ahead, use some of that stuff. And like, he's eating horrible food, and he starts chomping through a load of their food this time. It's like 2 months had happened before the players actually got to do anything. Well, they got to do stuff, but it was mostly, they're just journeying through, and I describe, it's pretty horrible. But they started off in the ruins of Nork Fort, and they were trying to get the Vox to work. Medic Blackthrone, who actually has tech use, wasn't there. He was like trying to get it to work, and they heard over the Vox when he was able to finally get it working for a bit before it exploded into sparks and a bit of smoke. That the entire area had been cordoned off for oral bombardment, and that basically all troops in that area had to run back. And there was only 11 hours, so the players were like, okay, actually this is going to be pretty tight. It depends how things go. Now the players kept going, oh, we'll just check the map, and I just kept going. I was like, well, much like last mission, you haven't been given a map, because those maps have vital strategic information, and the Imperial Guard, well, you're still a green unit, you're not getting maps as far as I'm... in this particular battlefront, different battlefronts, like, it's going to be different, but they do make it pretty clear in some of the Department of Munitorum books, stuff like that, that you never allow maps fall into enemy hands. And because the guys are still regarded as fairly green unit, they've only done one mission prior to this, not being given a map. I said, you've been shown a map, and you're we're allowed to see some stuff before, but that was 2 months ago. So it's like, okay, so that's right, we'll run back. And they'd fought a couple of orcs. They managed to dispatch fairly well. Trooper Love ran forward a flamer to start. He was really doing a lot of damage this session with that flamer. He had also been given they'd been given a melta-gun for the mission, which he was also, he was having his comrade carry it with a special ability that can switch him out. You can, as a free action, get the it off the other guy, and that was pretty cool. Just seeing him going around. The guys were going forward, and they were killing some of these orcs. And they went forward, and they eventually came across where the last position of their company was. And the guys were like, okay, what are we going to do? And they saw, like, this place had been overrun. And they're like, okay, we'll look around. They're saying, initially they're like, oh yeah, well, you know, we could go around and see how many bodies are. And it's like, look, if you want to go look for bodies, that's no problem, but that is time being spent. I'm not telling you how many bodies are there. At a quick glance, you can see several bodies. I'm not telling you my bodies are there unless, you know, you actually spend time doing it. You don't get to know first and do it. It's like, okay, fine. So the players go off, and they were looking around and it's like, we won't bother talking, except for a lot of guys agreed, we'll gather dog tags. We're putting a 20-minute cap on this. And I managed to recover about 30 dog tags. It's like, okay, they're pretty happy. I was like, this is at a glance, like, yeah, there's about 30 dog tags there. You're not stopping to count them. After that point, they said, look, we've got to go. And they're going through the place, and they can see there's, you know, there's a downed orc fight Obama and stuff, and they're moving through. And they managed to, like, they eventually started going, like, yeah, we'll have Trooper Love and Corporal Jorgensen go ahead of us, they'll scout out ahead. And it was like, yeah, pretty cool. And they managed to succeed and noticed that, okay, wait, there's an orc patrol actually going ahead. There's about 5 orcs sneaking along. These orcs are being a bit more, you know, stealthy than orcs you've seen before. These weren't orc commandos, but they were still, you know, they were being a bit more cautious, but they weren't screaming at them. They were obviously, you know, an advance guard looking for enemy forces to fight. Like, sort of like, yeah, they're looking around. They weren't shooting off their shots randomly or anything. So the player's like, okay. And they'd come back and like, yeah, I've seen some of these. And I explained to them, it's like, you could just let them go past. But the guys are like, no, take this. Because Trooper Love they got a surprise on. So Trooper Love sets fire to like 4 of them. And they're taking damage. And it doesn't kill them. Orcs are really tough. But you got a Trooper Jorgensen just sniping away at the enemy orcs. With his long lassies. Does considerable damage. And the rest of the group are running forward once more. They're overburdened with all of the equipment they have. Their base equipment plus the additional equipment they got for this mission. So it's like, okay. But to manage to easily dispatch this group of orcs, as a player for Trooper Love says, you know, his character doesn't particularly rack up a particularly high kill count. But everyone says like, yeah, but you're damaging loads of people. So it's like, yeah, okay. They were doing pretty well when they came across the ruins of a Valkyrie. Well, it wasn't ruins of Valkyrie, of the airfield that was at that particular base. There was only 1 Valkyrie there, and Medic backthrown and said, okay, I think this could be repaired, but it would take time. And they said, okay, but can any of us fly this? And they're like, no. So they're like, well, in that case, screw it, we'll just have to leave it. I said, hey, actually, wait, no, set up a booby trap in case any of the orcs come in after us. You know, if they try and open it to salvage it or something, it will kill them. So they're like, okay, that's pretty cool, we'll do that. So when it does this, and after the guys have gotten in the group, and I was like, you know that thing, like he actually specifically said to you, the only problem with it was that it was a problem with the fuel intake or something like that. It was like the problem when the engine's on the side, like that it wouldn't fly unless that was repaired. And I was like, you guys know, because they were desperately looking for a well, we're looking for 2 things. As always, they're looking for a map, because they're sick of not knowing where the hell they are. They have vague ideas of where they are, but they don't know exactly where they are. So like, okay, we're looking for a map, didn't see a map. And they're also going, oh, is there a Vox? Is there a Vox? And I was like, no, there's no Vox. And I said, you know, once they'd booby trapped the thing and had gone off about 5 minutes later, I just pointed out to another character, you know, he said that, but he was perfectly okay, except for, you know, one thinks there's nothing wrong with its Vox, because it would have Vox. And the guys are like, well, it's behind us now, we can't turn back. Plus, as I pointed out, it'll probably explode, because Blackthrone's not bad at, you know, setting up the bomb. Disarming it might be a bit more dangerous. I'm not saying they can't do it, but it could be a bit more dangerous. So like, yeah, they go off, and after a while they come to an area. I'm leaving out 1 or 2 bits of it, but after a while they come to an area where there's kind of fairly sheer surface going down, and they have to wind back and forth. And the guys are like, okay, this looks. And then there's like a rope bridge going across, and a bit more lower level down here over this side where they want to go to. And the guys are like, and there's a big drop then, and the guys are like, okay. And Sergeant McBrander goes, actually, he's like, Trooper Jorgensen, here, take my binoculars, have a look down there, and you know, make sure there's no orcs in ambush or whatever. And there was 2 orcs with rather large guns there, 2 orcs with big shooters, and they were like, okay, and they haven't seemed to have spotted us. They were on the opposite side. They were obviously, you know, there in ambush. And like, okay, how do we deal with this? So it's like, so they decide to set up, and they all took out their rifles and took careful aim. and they start firing off, doing semi-auto and various different things, and they just decimated the orcs. But then they saw a few lads going shots, firing for somewhere else, and when they basically went over to the microbead as like, you know, looking for some kind of contact, and they got some. There was a Valkyrie apparently had crashed, and there was an Imperial Navy liaison, 2 siege engineers, and somebody else. They were like, okay, he was like, well, you guys can come with us. And it's like, well, perhaps we have the Imperial Navy liaison guy. We managed to find a working box. We'll be able to, you know, we might be able to bargain for a lift out of here for him, because, you know, he's actually important, as are the siege engineers. They're like, okay, yeah, pretty fair enough. And they're also going, yeah, I bet he could also pilot a damn Valkyrie, except for we left it behind us and we've booby trapped it, so it's no point continuing on that. And the group are like, okay, well, you know, and they're like, oh yeah, I was like, when they got to the other side of the rope bridge, they're like, oh yeah, we'll cut the rope bridge, because there's probably no other Imperial forces coming in after us, because we seem to be behind the majority of them, and we know they like saw when they're up in that ridge and they look behind them. It's like, they saw like orc forces moving, so like, yeah, maybe this will slow down the orcs a bit. There'll be other ways around, but not directly following on our trail. I was like, okay, that's fair enough. And like, and they decided to go cut it, but then before they decided to cut, they're like, hey, what if this rope could be useful? You know, what if we got some rope from it? It's like, oh yeah, well, some of the rope isn't there like to support the whole thing. It's just there, you know, for other stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll do this. And I was just kind of looking and was like, yeah, I have no problem with you cutting off that rope, but I'm going to need a check, because the ropes that aren't keeping it, you know, up and support, they're taking all the weight. Those other ropes are there to like keep it stable and stuff. So I don't mind if you want to do this, but even if you're doing it on just one side, but that's going to be a lot less stable. So they're like, they talk about it for a minute. It's like, actually, we don't have time for this and other things. And as the Commissar player turned around, it's like, yeah, also, who wants to be carrying, you know, 100 feet of rope? We're already way over, you know, burden. And some of the guys are like, whoa, I didn't want to carry 100 feet. I wanted to carry, you know, like elaborate. If they're trying to carry like, you know, 2 foot of rope, yeah, I mean, like chop, no problem. But then elaborate, they're saying, let's take some more. I was like, that's going to require an athletics check. If it was only a small amount of rope, they would have just been lean over, chop that bit, chop it up near. So it's like, okay. They progressed on, and after a while, they started getting into an area where there was a lot of swamps. So they took out their big inflatable bolts and they started blowing up, spending, you know, God knows how long blowing them up. But then they started moving through, and after a while, they saw a shape looming in the mist, because there's very thick fog around. And then moving through, you know, they saw the shape looming in the mist. I was like, okay, that actually looks like a building. So they went over to Microbead once more and they're like, hey, is there, you know, basically asking if there's anybody there. And they're like, okay, there was somebody there. So they went in, and there was a commissar there, and they're like, oh crap. They also saw some gun servitors. What the situation was here is he had been overseeing the evacuation of some of the guys from this particular outpost, and had stayed there to ensure that this outpost would remain out of orc hands for as long as possible and delay the orcs as long as possible, because we actually saw people manning it. And he wasn't too keen on leaving his post, but the others, you know, said to him, well, you know, we've actually got some explosives and stuff. We could set it up so this place, when the orcs come in, it'll like booby traps kind of type things. Like, so that should slow him down enough. And you can leave the gun sorter. So like, okay, fair enough, because he hadn't already told him about. He actually had a sort of a transport kind of thing for water-based transport, which I described to the guys as kind of, yeah, it's pretty much like, you know, when you're imagining D-Day landing, those kind of big things, and the top of the front of them comes down when you get into shore. So like, okay, that's actually pretty cool. And later on they were like, hey, shouldn't there be a gun on this, because it's an Imperial thing? It's like, well, yeah, there might be some auto guns. And they were advised that probably heavy stubber seems fair for just like a little light, even open topped APC kind of thing in 40k. So it's like, okay. And they're going through, but after a while they heard the crack of las gunfire and moved off to the side, and they came across a lieutenant commander from their own regiment but from a different company, and they managed to rescue him, though a lot of his personnel died. They're fighting against commandos, and it was pretty cool, because when combat was going on, a lot of PCs, like, you know, once all the orcs who weren't engaged in close combat were dead, the PCs, and this is kind of a trend throughout the game, when then the PCs who were really good guns like Jorgensen and Triple Love, they go, okay, I'll shoot the orc in close combat. They would avoid, like, if they accidentally hit someone on the roll side, that'd be pretty bad. If they accidentally hit the commissar, they're terrified of this, so they would not shoot in close combat with the commissar. And I was saying, yeah, you could, you know, shooting your own sergeant is pretty bad, but like, yeah, but it's not as bad as shooting the commissar. Like, okay, it's Pretty true. So they maneuvered on after they got this guy. They managed to beat off a few. Well, they didn't beat off all the orcs, but they managed to, get your man, extract your man from the situation and start driving away. And they could feel, the sound of the shells hitting off. The bullets the orcs were firing hitting off the side of this vehicle. And then they went to this guy had a map, and the PC's like, oh, yeah, like he said, takes out the map, and he's kind of giving the Commissar dirty looks because the Commissar is looking over, looking at the map content. But he can't really be giving out too much for the Commissar for that. But he's not letting any of the other guys see the map. He doesn't want them seeing it. And he's like keeping on the person's like, okay. So he's looking at the thing. He's like, he tells the guy driving, he's like, yeah, change direction by this much. We're going to this particular camp. There's a chance that they might have some Valkyries or Quillalanders or whatever still there. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And they arrive at this base. There's some guys on the outside, and they're like, they're fighting off orcs, and they're manning the walls on the outside, the perimeter of this thing. And they're like, oh, we don't know this. They're really being paranoid about the group coming up in their vehicle. And your man, the Lieutenant Commander, the NPC, is like, oh, I'm Lieutenant Commander. You better let me in. He rolls his Intimidate, and I kind of thought after he rolled the Intimidate, he was like, and they're like, oh no, we're not letting. He's like, oh well. What do you think about that? There seems to be disobeying orders. What do you think about that, Commissar? And the Commissar was like, yeah. He rolled Intimidator Command himself as well. So they worked out pretty well. And they managed to get into the base. But when they got into the base, they saw this place had fallen to anarchy. There were guys going around looting and just a complete disarray. And they were like, oh, do we see any officers? Like, yeah, there's 1 or 2 officers. The PCs were shocked that there were members of their own regiment, being a Highborn regiment. They saw some of the Brontean guys. They were like, oh, well, they're lowborn. Not all the Brontean line guys were, going off and looting and stuff like that, but some of them were. And more than the Kinog guys, but there was still a good few of the Kinog guys, which the PCs were horrified at, like, they're disgracing our unit kind of type thing. And then there was also, as well as the 13th Kinog guys, and there's the Penal Legion guys, and guys from one or 2 other units, which guys are like, oh Jesus, they're really, this is not the way for guard to behave. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And they went over, the Commissar went over to one of these officers, like, oh, where's the close officer? It's like, oh, he's a guy sitting there, and he's just kind of sitting back. And the Commissar said, you should get your men in order. And he's like, or what, you'll shoot me? He pulls out the gun, puts it to his head, you'll get your men in order. He's like, just take the, he lifts up the bottle of bourbon, he pulls the cork off, spits at the Commissar's feet. Because he basically, these guys had lost all hope. Some were just saying, we'll loot the place, some were desperately trying to find a way out, that kind of thing. And some guys were just trying to, acquire whatever luxuries were left in the base and live out their last few hours in relative peace. So it's like, okay. They did pretty well. The Commissar just blew off your man's head, and he gave a speech, and I actually described most of the base. A lot of the guys turned around and they started on slinging like las guns and different things. And the group kind of got the message that, yeah, if they pushed it much further, this was going to turn into a fight. And I kind of realised, didn't have the time for this, but the sergeant, for example, made mental notes. He's like, actually, one of the players turned around and was like, okay, just to be clear, if a firefight does start here, I'm specifically shooting the Kinog guys first. Because they had such distaste for some of their own unit turning effectively with such treasonous actions. I'm like, okay, pretty cool. It's fair enough. And the sergeant's like, okay, I'm going to try and remember the name of, I'm going to try and remember the unit IDs for some of these guys. It's like, okay, fair enough. And the Commissar goes, I'm going to take him as dog tags. They manage to calm things down a little bit and start moving away. Although, I like the point that they said, like, we're going to keep the Imperial Navy guy in the middle, because if we do find a Valkyrie or Quillander, he's probably the only one who can fly it. Like, okay, that's an extremely reasonable point. And they go through, running along, and they come across, they see a scene where there seems to be some guys, they're holding off other people, some guys from doing it, and plus a couple of Brontean line knife guys, and there's a Master Sergeant and a couple of and a Storm Preacher. They're basically held these guys up for hanging because they're they're falling to looting, all these other things. The Commissar goes in amongst them, and I said, just because you're I warned them first, and it's like, just because you're a Commissar in a situation like this, these guys might think that it's a high possibility that a commissar was killed and somebody just put on his uniform, especially because you're not a familiar face. It's like, okay, I know, I accept the risk, I'll go in. But I didn't, because like, yeah, it doesn't mean they're guaranteed to start shooting you. You managed to do pretty well in the command check, and he talks to the he decides to talk to the master sergeant. He's like, look, you know, there's a lander back there that we had. You guys can take it. It's more important for you to try and get your men out of here. And he convinced them. You know, anybody who's left in the base basically firmly believes that they're not going to do that. And these guys are like, you know, if we're going to die, we will ensure that we will die with honor, kind of thing. With where your men was going. So it comes out like, yeah, look, go over there. Things are so, you know, he has the guys leave on the double march. And as he turns around to the group, he's like, look, there's going to be someone trying to steal it already. It's going to be gone by the time we get back there. They might as well use it. It's like, okay. They go to the airfield. Unfortunately, there is just one like Aquila lander, but it is totaled. Like, it's not going to work. They do not have enough time or probably the resources, especially with all the looting, to get it back. So like, okay. And they say, well, we're just going to have the foot saga from here. And they do. They make their exit from the base. With the constant noise over the... they didn't bother trying to find a Vox here. They're like... they knew it wasn't going to happen. You know, it's like, hey, it's probably too late to get somebody to come in for them. So they just ran. They didn't abandon any of their gear, which I thought was like, well, you could probably move faster if you abandoned some of your gear or something, but they didn't. Especially because they knew they'd probably get in trouble. So like, we'll stick with our gear. We have to dump too much of it anyway. We could be dumping useful gear. So they eventually managed to get to the Fallow River, which was, they're supposed to get to the other side of it. And they inflate their boats once more and they go across. So you can see there's a battle on the bridge. They decide we're not going to intervene in the battle on the bridge here, but as they're swimming across, they notice, you know, one makes a tactical imperialis roll and realizes, yeah, actually that could be a that bridge could fall. It could be lost if we don't go in and, you know, reinforce the guys. So I say, okay, let's go. It's getting towards the end of the time, getting towards the time when it's supposed to finish the game. So I said, okay, I'm just going to describe, if the NPCs fight, you know, some of the other orcs, I'll describe the guys you guys have to kill to repel the action. You know, just to do it more quickly rather than describing, oh look, this NPC does this, and it's like, yeah, screw it. And they sent off the Lieutenant Commander and the Imperial Navy liaison and said, we're going to reinforce this position. Came in, they divided up a group of orc commandos and a huge orc knob. He's not supposed to be hulking in the scenario, but I don't think they wanted to put in too many rules. Because this was supposed to be, you know, one eventually, like, see, oh, this is what one of these wars like. So they hadn't made him hulking because they didn't want to put in size rules, I'm guessing. I don't know about vehicles, so it's like, okay, fair enough. I could have put them in, but I just said for me, I was like, yeah, I'm just going to make, especially because the group aren't a starting group. So I said, yeah, I'm going to make him hulking, but I'm going to give him some extra wounds. And I was like, that'll make it a bit more interesting. They end up defending the barricade as these orcs around 20 meters. So this orc knob runs forward. Doing about 2 meters, and you know, Sergeant McBrander said, you know, take down the big ones first, and he himself went on, or I think Trooper Love had his go before him, and it was like, yeah, well, you can probably hit the big guy and like 2 of the smaller guys, or you can try from the angle you're currently standing in, or you could hit all 4 of the smaller guys. Like, I'll try and hit the smaller guys. A lot of them dodge, managed to avoid the attack or whatever, but it's like, okay, fair enough. But he did manage to hurt some of them, so it's like, okay, fair enough. The commissar and the Sergeant McBrander managed to charge and they attacked the orc knob. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. Trooper Jorgensen started sniping off some of the guys, but they started focusing in on the knob. One of the orcs was rolling on the ground on fire. He lasted the longest because he got set on fire and he just panicked and started rolling on the ground, oddly enough. And it was pretty interesting seeing the way the players handled it. Trooper Love took out the melta-gun. I think this might have been the first time he was in the entire mission. Took out the melta-gun and he shot the orc knob, and it took more than one shot. Like, the guys all just started wailing on the big orc. And I think it was him who managed to, actually, with a second melta-gun shot, managed to blow out the orc knob's leg, managed to blow off his leg. So I imagine the knee being chopped, and then, you know, he went down, kind of a thing. But he didn't manage to kill him with that. It still took the rest of the group doing more damage to him, because I don't really know. It's like, oh, that's a lot of damage. Before I did the calculation, I was imagining like, oh, he'll go down from the knee injury and then the other PCs. You just see them chopping away at him mercilessly, and he dies. So it's going to go with that kind of description. But he wasn't actually dead, he was just lost a leg. It's like, okay, they managed to repel him, and I revealed to them how the scenario is supposed to end, and they were like, wow, that would just be horrible. One of the guys like, that's actually something straight out of a book. You know, some novel or something. That how the scenario is supposed to end is that you're met by like one of the sergeants in this place. He goes, oh, thank God you made it. They're after extending the bombardment zone. We have 6 hours to get to this place. I said, I'm not doing that. We're not going to go with that. However, you're getting their leave. And I told him, like, yeah, next session you're going to court. You're going to be meeting the subsector governor. So you can have all the fun that lies there. From the lieutenant he killed, the commissar had retrieved a power sword, and he handed it in as his duty. And then the guy's like, "Oh, does he get to keep the power? You know, did they hand him back the power sword as some kind of reward?" And I'm like, "No, those things are rare. He's got a good quality chainsaw. He's fine." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." It's like, I won't. When they get something, they'll bloody get it because they deserve it. Not because they picked it off some guy and they handed it in. Yeah, that's good karma, but not so. You know, if you want to keep that power sword, you steal it and you don't tell them that you found it. If you want to get the power sword, you do that. If you hand it in, you're probably not getting it back. That's the way I'm going with it. It's like, yeah, this is Imperial Guard. It's horrible. So next session, we'll be having them finding a bit more about the big picture, more than likely, which should be fun. Still having fun with the system. You know, it's there's some bits I found a bit odd, like the commissar not having a comrade because they have a sergeant in the group. Well, not because they have a sergeant in the group, but because they have a sergeant in the group, he can give big bonus if you have a comrade who can do certain actions, which all regular comrades can do. And it's a regular comrade as opposed to the servitor that the engineer has, because that's not really a comrade. And the commissar doesn't have any of these things. But the fact you can give them a bonus +4 damage with a command check kind of thing is a free action. Like, wow, that is awesome. If they have one of these appropriate comrades. But it's you know, kind of like, yeah, he's kind of missing out on some of the damage. Although he's got much better gear than the rest of it. Like a good quality bullpup and good quality chainsword should never be underestimated. These are really nice things. But it's like, okay, I'm not sure exactly how that's gonna, you know, it's like he's, you know, I'm a bit concerned that the other guys just outpace him in damage after a while. But I suppose he could always invest in other things. And he does have a bit of a leg up from just, and he doesn't have to rely on the sergeant actually succeeding these roles. It's like, okay, fair enough. Right, I'll leave it there because it's running actually quite long, and I'll see you. Hopefully, I'll have another session to report on next week. I'll see you again. Goodbye.